I rented an Airbnb for a short vacation, eager for a break from the hustle and bustle of my city life. The listing boasted a cozy cottage in the woods, promising tranquility and a chance to reconnect with nature. It seemed like the perfect escape, and I was excited to leave the city behind for a while. The drive to the cottage was long and winding, the road becoming progressively narrower as I ventured deeper into the woods. The lush greenery and towering trees enveloped me, and a sense of isolation began to set in. I couldn't help but feel a little apprehensive as the world I knew faded away, and the forest closed in around me. After what felt like hours, I arrived at the address provided. The cottage was a charming sight, nestled amidst the trees with a small, meandering stream nearby. It looked like something out of a fairy tale, and I couldn't help but smile at the idyllic setting. My host, a middle-aged man named Richard, greeted me warmly. He was polite and seemed genuinely concerned about ensuring my stay was comfortable. The cottage was cozy, with all the amenities I needed for a peaceful getaway. Richard had prepared a basket of fresh fruits and a handwritten note, welcoming me to his slice of paradise. As I settled in, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. The solitude and beauty of the place were exactly what I had been looking for. The days were spent hiking in the woods, reading by the stream, and watching the fireflies dance in the evening light. It was blissful, a world away from my city life. But as the days turned into nights, a subtle undercurrent of unease began to surface. The silence of the woods was oppressive, and the shadows that lurked in the trees seemed to carry secrets of their own. I told myself it was just my imagination running wild, that I was simply not used to the quiet of the forest. One evening, as I was sitting on the porch, I noticed a path leading deeper into the woods. I hadn't explored that direction yet, and curiosity got the better of me. I decided to follow the trail, hoping to discover a hidden gem in the woods. The path led me to a small clearing where I found an old, overgrown garden. It was a beautiful spot, but it had been neglected for some time. Wildflowers had taken over, and the remnants of what must have once been a vibrant garden were now barely visible. It was both enchanting and eerie, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of melancholy in the air. As I wandered through the garden, I discovered a weathered gravestone hidden among the wildflowers. The inscription was barely legible, but I could make out the name Eleanor. The gravestone seemed out of place in the garden, and I couldn't help but wonder who Eleanor had been. I returned to the cottage, my mind filled with questions. I asked Richard about the garden and the gravestone, and his demeanor changed subtly. He seemed uncomfortable and avoided giving me a direct answer. Instead, he mumbled something about the garden being a remnant of the previous owner's passion, and urged me not to worry about it. Despite his reassurance, the unease that had been growing within me intensified. There was something about the garden, about Richard's reaction, that felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this place than met the eye. As the days passed, I became more attuned to the subtle details of the cottage. The rooms were filled with old furniture and knickknacks, each piece seeming to carry a story of its own. I had a growing suspicion that Richard was not the only one who had lived in this cottage. One afternoon, while searching for a spare blanket in the attic, I stumbled upon a box of old photographs. They depicted a family, a couple with 2 children, and a small cottage in the woods. The photographs were dated from decades ago, and I couldn't help but feel a connection between the images and the cottage I now inhabited. I decided to dig deeper into the history of the cottage, hoping to uncover the secrets that seemed to be lurking within its walls. I reached out to the local library and conducted research into the area. It was then that I stumbled upon a news article from the 1960s, a headline that made my blood turn cold. The article described a tragedy that had taken place in the very cottage I was staying in. A family of 4 had lived there, but their lives had been cut short in a horrific accident. The cause of the accident was never determined, and the cottage had been left abandoned ever since. As I read the details of the story, my mind raced with questions. It seemed that Richard had not been entirely truthful about the cottage's history. I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding, as though the spirits of the past were reaching out to me, urging me to uncover the truth. One evening, I decided to explore the garden again, drawn to the mystery of Eleanor's gravestone. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows in the fading light. I reached the garden and stood before the gravestone, the air heavy with a sense of the past. As I gazed at the gravestone, I heard a soft whisper in the wind, a voice that seemed to come from the depths of the forest. It was a name, Eleanor, carried on the breeze. The sound was so faint, so distant that I couldn't be sure if I had truly heard it, or if it was a figment of my imagination. But I couldn't ignore the sensation that the cottage and the garden held a connection to the family from the past, that their story was entwined with the place I now called home. The unease that had been growing within me intensified, and I knew I had to uncover the truth. The next day, I decided to reach out to the local community for information about the family who had once lived in the cottage. I visited the nearby town and began asking questions, hoping to find someone who remembered the family from decades ago. It was a long and tedious process, but eventually I struck a breakthrough. An elderly woman in the town had known the family and remembered their tragic story. She told me about Eleanor, the youngest daughter who had died under mysterious circumstances. Eleanor had been a bright and lively child, the woman explained, but her death had cast a shadow over the family. It was believed that she had drowned in the stream near the cottage, but the circumstances surrounding her death had always been unclear. There were whispers of foul play, of secrets that had been buried with her. As I listened to the woman's story, my heart raced. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly falling into place. It seemed that the spirits of the past were reaching out to me, urging me to uncover the truth of what had happened to Eleanor. I returned to the cottage, my mind filled with a sense of determination. It was clear that Richard had been keeping secrets, that he knew more about the history of the cottage than he had let on. I needed to confront him, to demand answers about Eleanor and the family from the past. That evening, I found Richard in the living room, sitting by the fireplace. I could see the unease in his eyes as I approached, and I wasted no time in confronting him about the family's history. Richard hesitated for a moment, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames in the fireplace. Then he began to speak, his voice heavy with sorrow. He revealed that he was the sole surviving member of the family, that he had been a child at the time of Eleanor's death. He told me the truth about the family's history, about the darkness that had cast a shadow over their lives. It was a tale of secrets and tragedy, of a young girl's life cut short under mysterious circumstances. He explained that Eleanor's death had torn the family apart, that her memory still haunted him to this day. As he spoke, I could see the pain in his eyes, the weight of guilt that he had carried for decades. It became clear that Richard had chosen to keep the family's history hidden, that he had wanted to protect me from the darkness that lurked within the cottage. But the truth had a way of coming to light, and as Richard finished his story, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. Eleanor's spirit had reached out to me, urging me to uncover the truth, and in doing so, I had helped to bring the family's story to light. The following days were filled with a sense of healing and understanding. Richard and I spent hours talking about the past, sharing our memories of the family and the cottage. It was a bittersweet experience, a chance to come to terms with the tragedy that had unfolded there. As I prepared to leave the cottage, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for the lessons I had learned. The spirits of the past had reminded me of the importance of uncovering the truth, of not letting the secrets of history remain buried. The cottage in the woods had been a place of beauty and darkness, a sanctuary for the lost, and a repository of the past. Eleanor's spirit had reached out to me, urging me to uncover the truth, and in doing so, I had helped to bring her memory to light. As I drove away from the cottage, I couldn't help but feel that Eleanor's presence still lingered, watching over the place she had once called home. The shadows of the past had been dispelled, and in their place there was a sense of peace and closure. The cottage in the woods had been a place of secrets and mysteries, but it had also been a place of healing and understanding. And as I looked back at the cottage one last time, I knew that its history would forever be a part of my own story, a reminder of the enduring power of the past and the importance of uncovering the truth.